The distant echo of gunfire faded into the hills as Josephine McAllister raced across the dusty plains, her heart pounding harder than her horse's hooves against the parched earth. She had fled Copper Creek with nothing but the clothes on her back, and a tarnished reputation that spread like wildfire through the Oregon Territory. The year was 1876, and for a woman alone, the frontier offered little mercy, especially one whose name had been dragged through the mud by a powerful man's lies. The setting sun cast long shadows across the rolling landscape as Josephine spotted the outline of Oregon City in the distance. This would be her 7th town in as many months, each previous refuge discovered by those who believed the vicious rumors. Exhaustion clung to her bones as she slowed her horse to a trot, knowing she needed to craft a new identity before sunrise. "Just a little farther, Belle," she whispered to her chestnut mare, patting the animal's sweaty neck. "Maybe this time will be different." The main street of Oregon City bustled with evening activity despite the late hour. Miners, farmers, and townsfolk moved between establishments with purpose, while oil lamps cast warm glows through windows of businesses still open for trade. Josephine kept her head low as she passed the general store, the blacksmith's forge, and finally the local saloon, where raucous laughter spilled onto the street alongside the tinkling notes of a slightly out-of-tune piano. She directed Belle toward the livery stable, where a young boy no more than 16 greeted her with a tip of his cap. "Evening, madam. Looking to board your horse?" Josephine nodded, dismounting with practiced ease despite her fatigue. "Yes, please." "And can you direct me to a respectable boarding house? One that might take in a lady traveling alone?" The boy took Belle's reins. "Mrs. Patterson runs a fine establishment 3 blocks north. Tell her Tommy sent you, and she might even have some stew left from supper." "Thank you, Tommy." She reached into her pocket and retrieved 2 coins, pressing them into his palm. His eyes widened at her generosity. "That's too much, madam." "Take good care of Belle," Josephine replied with a small smile, hoisting her saddlebags over her shoulder. "She's carried me a long way." The Patterson boarding house stood at the end of a quiet residential street, its white clapboard exterior freshly painted and inviting. Josephine hesitated at the bottom of the porch steps, rehearsing her story. In this town, she would be Josephine Miller, a widow traveling to meet distant relatives in Washington Territory. The lie tasted bitter on her tongue, but she had learned that truth was a luxury she could no longer afford. Mrs. Patterson proved to be a round-faced woman with shrewd eyes that missed nothing as she assessed Josephine from head to toe. "Room and board is $2 a week, paid in advance," she stated firmly. "No gentlemen callers, no liquor, and breakfast is at 6 sharp." Josephine counted out the money. "Thank you, madam. I won't be any trouble. See that you aren't. Town like this values propriety." Mrs. Patterson softened slightly as she noticed Josephine's exhaustion. "There's washing water in your room. I'll bring up some stew." The room was small but clean, with a narrow bed, a washstand, and a small window overlooking the main street. Josephine set her saddlebags on the floor and sank onto the mattress, allowing herself a moment of relief before beginning her nightly ritual of washing away the dust of the road. By morning, she would need to secure employment. Her savings wouldn't last forever, and idle hands invited suspicion. Perhaps the general store needed help, or one of the restaurants. She had worked as everything from a laundress to a schoolteacher in her flight from Copper Creek, always moving on when whispers of her past threatened to catch up. After washing her face and hands, Josephine heard a soft knock at the door. Mrs. Patterson entered with a tray bearing a steaming bowl of stew and a chunk of bread. "Eat up and get some rest," the woman advised. Oregon City's a decent place for those willing to work hard and mind their own business. That's exactly what I'm hoping for, Josephine replied earnestly. Later, as she lay in the unfamiliar bed listening to the occasional sounds of horses and wagons passing below her window, Josephine allowed tears to escape for the first time in days. She had once been the respected daughter of a banker, educated and destined for a comfortable life. Now she was running from town to town, pursued by rumors started by Edward Blackwell, the wealthy mine owner whose advances she had rejected. His revenge had been swift and devastating accusations of theft and immoral behavior that no one dared question coming from such a powerful man. "This time will be different," she whispered into the darkness, not entirely convinced. "It has to be." Dawn arrived with the sounds of Oregon City awakening. Josephine dressed in her second-best dress, a navy blue cotton with minimal adornments, and pinned her honey-brown hair into a modest chignon. She needed to appear respectable yet not draw undue attention. Breakfast was a simple but hearty affair of porridge, biscuits, and strong coffee. The other boarder's two elderly sisters and a traveling salesman nodded politely but asked few questions, much to Josephine's relief. "I hear Mr. Wilson at the general store is looking for help," Mrs. Patterson mentioned as she refilled coffee cups. "His daughter's expecting her first child and can't manage the counter anymore." "Thank you," Josephine said gratefully. "I'll inquire this morning." Wilson's general store occupied a prime location on Main Street. A bell jingled cheerfully as Josephine entered, taking in the well-organized shelves stocked with everything from preserved foods to farm implements, fabric to patent medicines. A bespectacled man in his 50s looked up from behind the counter. "Good morning, miss. What can I help you find today?" "Good morning, sir. I was told you might be looking for assistance in the store," Josephine said, summoning her most professional tone. "I'm new to town but have experience with accounting and customer service." Mr. Wilson raised an eyebrow. "You're educated then?" "Yes, sir." "My father believed in schooling for his daughters as well as his sons." The storekeeper considered her for a long moment. "Can you start today? My daughter's husband is taking her to Portland to see a specialist. I'm short-handed." Relief washed over Josephine. "Absolutely. I'm a quick learner." "The position pays $15 a month, Sundays off," he explained, coming around the counter. "I'll need your full name for my records." "Josephine Miller," she replied, the false surname still awkward on her tongue. "Well, Mrs. Miller, miss," she corrected automatically, then winced. Her widow's story would be more believable. "That is, I am widowed, but I've never grown accustomed to the title." Something flickered in Mr. Wilson's eyes, sympathy or suspicion. She couldn't tell, but he merely nodded. "Miss Miller, then, let me show you the inventory system." The morning passed in a flurry of information, as Mr. Wilson explained his meticulous bookkeeping and introduced Josephine to regular customers. Most were friendly, if curious about the newcomer, and Josephine carefully responded with her practice story, emphasizing her temporary stay in Oregon City. By midday, the store had grown busy with ranchers' wives gathering supplies and miners purchasing necessities before heading back to their claims. Josephine found comfort in the rhythm of commerce, in weighing flour and measuring fabric, in tallying purchases and making change. It was honest work that required concentration, allowing little time for her mind to dwell on darker thoughts. "You're a natural," Mr. Wilson commented as the lunch hour lull arrived. "Take 30 minutes to eat if you like. There's a cafe next door that serves decent food." Josephine thanked him and stepped outside, blinking in the bright sunlight. The street bustled with activity, freight wagons loaded with timber, cowboys leading horses to the blacksmith, children darting between adults on mysterious errands of their own. For a moment, she allowed herself to imagine belonging here, becoming part of this community's tapestry. The cafe was modest but clean, with checkered tablecloths and the enticing aroma of beef stew simmering. Josephine chose a small table near the window and ordered the cheapest option on the menu, a bowl of soup and bread for 15 cents. She was halfway through her meal when the cafe door swung open, admitting a tall figure that commanded immediate attention. The man removed his hat, revealing sun-streaked brown hair and a face weathered by years under the open sky. His clothes were practical rather than flashy worn leather boots, denim pants, and a faded blue shirt under a leather vest. Unlike many men in town, his face was clean-shaven, accentuating a strong jawline and alert hazel eyes. Those eyes scanned the room before landing on Josephine. Recognition flashed across his features, followed by something that made her stomach clench certainty. He knew her. Panic rose in Josephine's throat as the stranger approached her table with purposeful strides. She calculated her options, the distance to the door, whether she could reach the boarding house, and gather her things before he spread whatever rumors he carried. "Miss McAllister," he said quietly, his voice carrying a hint of Texas drawl. "I thought that was you." Josephine's hand trembled as she set down her spoon. "I'm afraid you're mistaken, sir. My name is Miller." He studied her face, then glanced around the cafe before pulling out the chair opposite her without invitation. "Kent Sutherland," he offered instead of arguing. "I worked your father's ranch outside Copper Creek for nearly 2 years. The revelation startled her. This man wasn't one of Edward Blackwell's associates come to torment her, but someone who knew her before the scandal. Still, she couldn't risk acknowledging the truth. "As I said, you're mistaken. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to return to work." She reached for her purse, but his next words froze her in place. "I know what Blackwell did," Kent said, his voice dropping even lower. "I know your name was ruined by lies." Josephine's gaze snapped to his, searching for mockery or threat and finding neither. "How could you possibly?" "Because I was there when he hatched the scheme," Kent replied grimly. "I was hired to guard his mining office after the robbery attempt last year. I heard things not meant for anyone else's ears." 1,000 questions crowded Josephine's mind, but the cafe was too public. Anyone could be listening, and her fragile new beginning hung by a thread. "Mr. Sutherland, I don't know what game you're playing, but no game, Miss McAllister. I know who you really are." His eyes held hers steadily. "And I think I might be able to help clear your name." For the first time in months, hope flickered in Josephine's chest, a dangerous, fragile thing she hardly dared acknowledge. "The general store," she whispered. "I finish at 6. Kent nodded once and rose from the table. "Until then." He departed as quickly as he'd arrived, leaving Josephine to stare after him with her meal forgotten. Could she trust him? The very notion seemed foolish after all she'd endured. Yet there had been something in his direct gaze that compelled belief. The afternoon crawled by as Josephine mechanically assisted customers while her thoughts raced. Kent Sutherland claimed to have information that could exonerate her, but what exactly did he know? And why would a cowboy she barely remembered risk helping her against someone as powerful as Edward Blackwell? At precisely 6 o'clock, Mr. Wilson locked the store's cash box and bid Josephine good night with a satisfied nod. "You'll do well here, Miss Miller. See you at 7 tomorrow." Outside, the evening air had cooled considerably, bringing the scent of pine from the surrounding forests. Josephine hesitated on the boardwalk, scanning for Kent Sutherland's tall figure. "Miss McAllister." She started at the voice behind her, turning to find Kent leaning against the wall of the alley beside the store. "Please don't call me that. she hissed, glancing around nervously. "Let's walk," he suggested, gesturing toward the edge of town where fewer people would overhear. "Your reputation is still intact here. Nobody's looking twice at you." Reluctantly, Josephine fell into step beside him. They walked in silence until reaching a small park where a lone bench overlooked the Willamette River. The setting sun turned the water to molten gold, a beauty Josephine might have appreciated under different circumstances. "Why are you in Oregon City?" she asked once they were seated. Kent turned his hat in his hands. "Tracking Blackwell's operations. After what happened in Copper Creek, I couldn't stomach working for him anymore. I've been gathering evidence of his wrongdoings, the claim jumping, the bribes to officials, and yes, the lies he spread about you." "Evidence?" Josephine's heartbeat quickened. "What sort of evidence?" "Letters. Financial records showing payments to witnesses who testified against you. And this." Kent reached inside his vest and withdrew a folded document. "A confession from Jim Reeves, the store clerk who claimed you stole that necklace. Blackwell paid him $50 to lie." Josephine's hands shook as she unfolded the paper. There it was in black and white, an admission that Edward Blackwell had orchestrated the theft accusation after she'd refused his proposal of becoming his mistress. Tears blurred her vision as she read the details of how her life had been systematically destroyed. "Why?" she whispered, looking up at Kent. "Why would you do this for me?" A muscle worked in his jaw as he stared out at the river. "Because I watched my own sister suffer a similar fate years ago in Texas. A wealthy rancher took a liking to her, and when she refused him, he spread rumors that ruined her standing in our town. He paused, pain etching lines around his eyes. "She couldn't bear the shame. Took her own life when I was 16. "I'm so sorry," Josephine said softly, understanding now his motivation. "When I realized what Blackwell was doing to you, I couldn't stand by. Not again." Kent turned to face her fully. "But collecting evidence hasn't been enough. Blackwell has too many connections, too much influence. I need something more concrete to bring him down completely. And you think I can help you find it? I think together we might stand a chance." He hesitated. "There's more you should know. Blackwell's expanding his operations. He's bought controlling interest in a mine here in Oregon City. That's why I followed his trail here. I didn't expect to find you." The revelation sent a chill down Josephine's spine. "He's coming here." "When?" "Within the month, according to what I've heard. He's sending his foreman ahead to assess the operation." Kent's expression grew grave. "If he discovers you're here, I'll have to run again," she finished, despair washing over her. "Or we can finish this," Kent countered. "Gather enough evidence that not even his money can silence the truth." "But it would be dangerous." Josephine stared at the confession in her hands. For months she had been running, hiding, starting over only to flee again. The exhaustion of constant fear had hollowed her from within. What Kent proposed offered risk, but also the possibility of reclaiming her life and her family name. "What exactly would we need to do?" she asked. "Access his business records here in Oregon City. Find proof of his illegal dealings that would interest federal marshals, not just local lawmen he can bribe." Kent leaned forward. "I've been working as a hand at the Wilkinson Ranch outside town, but I've made inquiries about security positions at the mine. If I can get hired there, and I already have a position of trust at the general store," Josephine added, her mind working rapidly. "Mr. Wilson supplies the mining operations. I could potentially see shipping manifests, orders." Kent's eyes brightened with admiration. "You catch on quick." "I've had to," she replied simply. They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their potential alliance hanging between them. Josephine studied Kent Sutherland's profile as he gazed thoughtfully at the darkening horizon. There was something solid about him, a steadiness she hadn't encountered in her months of fleeing from shadow to shadow. "Why should I trust you?" she finally asked, the question that had been burning in her mind since their encounter in the cafe. Kent turned to her, his expression serious. "You shouldn't, not completely. Not yet. Trust has to be earned." He stood and offered his hand to help her rise from the bench. "But I give you my word, Josephine McAllister, that I will not betray your confidence. Whatever happens, your secret is safe with me until you choose otherwise." The use of her real name, spoken with such certainty, sent an unexpected warmth through her chest. She placed her hand in his, noting the calluses that spoke of honest labor. "I should get back to the boarding house before Mrs. Patterson locks the doors," she said, withdrawing her hand quickly. "I'll walk you part way," Ken offered. "Less conspicuous if we're not seen arriving together." As they made their way back toward town, maintaining a respectable distance between them, Josephine felt the first stirrings of something she had almost forgotten: determination. For too long, she had been reacting, running, hiding. Perhaps it was time to stand and fight instead. "Meet me at the livery stable tomorrow at noon," Kent suggested as they reached the edge of the residential district. "We can ride out to the foothills, speak more freely there." "I only have 30 minutes for lunch," Josephine reminded him. "Tell Wilson you need to check on your horse. Most folks understand that concern." She nodded. "Until tomorrow, then." Kent tipped his hat and turned away, his tall figure soon swallowed by the gathering darkness. Josephine watched him go, uncertainty and hope battling within her chest. She had just agreed to a dangerous plan with a man she barely knew, based on little more than his word, and a document that could easily be forged. Yet something deeper than reason told her Kent Sutherland was genuine. Perhaps it was the unguarded pain when he spoke of his sister, or the way his eyes held no trace of the predatory interest she had learned to fear in men like Edward Blackwell. The boarding house was quiet when she arrived, most residents already retired to their rooms. "Mrs. Patterson looked up from her mending in the parlor. "Getting acquainted with the town?" she asked, her tone neutral but her eyes sharp. "Yes, madam. Oregon City seems very pleasant." Josephine kept her voice light. "Mr. Wilson hired me at the general store today." The landlady's expression softened slightly. "Wilson's a fair employer. You've made a good start." "Thank you. Good night, Mrs. Patterson." In her room, Josephine carefully hid Jim Reeves' confession inside the lining of her trunk before preparing for bed. As she brushed her hair, her reflection in the small mirror appeared different, somehow less haunted, perhaps. The constant fear that had been her companion for months had receded, if only temporarily. Sleep came easier than expected, and for once, her dreams were not filled with pursuit and panic. The following morning brought steady rain, turning Oregon City's dirt streets to mud and dampening the usual bustle of commerce. Despite the weather, Mr. Wilson's store saw a constant stream of customers stocking up on supplies while waiting for clearer skies. "Weather like this is good for business," the storekeeper remarked cheerfully, as Josephine tallied a particularly large order for a rancher. "Folks can't work their fields or mines, so they come to town instead." The morning passed quickly, and as noon approached, Josephine grew increasingly anxious about her planned meeting with Kent. The rain had slackened to a drizzle, but it would still be noticeable if she returned from lunch soaking wet. "Mr. Wilson," she ventured during a quiet moment, "would it be possible for me to check on my horse during lunch? I'm concerned about her in this weather." The storekeeper waved a hand. "Take as long as you need. Animals come first." Grateful for his understanding, Josephine hurried to the livery stable with her shawl pulled tight against the damp air. Kent was already there, speaking quietly with Tommy while examining the hoof of a large bay gelding. "Miss Miller," Tommy called when he spotted her. "Come to see Belle. She's doing fine, eating better than any horse in the stable." "Thank you, Tommy. I was worried about her with all this rain." Kent straightened, nodding a greeting that revealed nothing of their arrangement. "Your mare's in good hands." "I was just telling Tommy here that this old boy is due for new shoes before I ride back to the Wilkinson spread." The boy puffed up with importance. "I told Mr. Sutherland I can have it done by tomorrow morning, sure as anything." "I'm certain you can," Josephine agreed, moving toward Belle's stall to maintain the pretense of checking on her horse. Kent followed, keeping his voice low. "Riding in the rain isn't ideal. There's a back room at Donovan's feed store where we can talk privately. The owner lets me store some of my gear there." They made their excuses to Tommy and hurried through the muddy streets to the feed store, attracting little attention in the inclement weather. The back room proved to be a small storage area with sacks of grain providing makeshift seating. "Not exactly elegant accommodations," Ken apologized as he closed the door behind them. "I've had worse," Josephine replied honestly, removing her damp shawl. "What progress have you made at the mine?" "I spoke with the foreman this morning. They're hiring security for the night shift. Seems they've had trouble with claim jumpers." Kent leaned against a stack of feed sacks. "I start tomorrow night, but I've already learned something interesting. Blackwell's invested in more than just the mining operation here. He's buying property throughout Oregon City, including businesses on Main Street." Josephine frowned. That doesn't sound like his usual strategy. In Copper Creek, he focused entirely on mining. Exactly. He's changing tactics, becoming more entrenched in community operations. Kent ran a hand through his hair, leaving it slightly disheveled. "Makes me wonder what he's really after." "The railway," Josephine said suddenly, remembering conversations from her father's dinner table. There were rumors in Copper Creek about a new railway line connecting to Portland. If Oregon City is on that route. Kent's eyes widened. Land speculation. If he knows where the railway's coming through before it's publicly announced, he could buy property for pennies and sell it for dollars once the news breaks. Josephine finished. "My father always said the real fortunes in the West aren't in gold, but in anticipating progress." "Your father sounds like a wise man." "He was," Josephine said softly. "Blackwell ruined him along with me. The bank foreclosed on our home after the scandal. My father suffered an apoplexy 3 months later." Kent's expression darkened. "I'm sorry, Josephine, I didn't know." The use of her first name should have struck her as too familiar, but instead it felt like reclaiming a piece of herself. "He's buried in Copper Creek. I couldn't even attend the funeral without risking arrest based on Blackwell's false accusations." "All the more reason to end this," Kent said firmly. "If Blackwell is involving himself in railway speculation, there might be federal regulations involved. That could be our way to authorities beyond his influence." Josephine nodded, her resolve strengthening. "What do you need from me?" "Keep your position at Wilson's. Listen for any unusual orders or shipments to the mine, and watch for anyone new arriving in town who might be connected to Blackwell." Kent hesitated. "There's something else you should be aware of. Blackwell travels with a man named Marcus Doyle, his personal enforcer." A chill ran through Josephine. "I remember him. Tall with a scar across his cheek. That's him. If you see Doyle in Oregon City, find me immediately. Don't go back to your boarding house. Don't finish your shift at the store. Just get word to me at the mine or the Wilkinson ranch." The gravity in Kent's voice made it clear this wasn't an exaggeration. Marcus Doyle was dangerous, perhaps more so than Blackwell himself. "I understand," she said quietly. They spent the remainder of their time establishing signals and meeting places, planning contingencies for various scenarios. When Josephine realized she had been gone nearly an hour, she rose hastily. "Mr. Wilson will wonder what's become of me." "One more thing," Kent said, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small Derringer pistol. "I want you to have this." Josephine stared at the weapon. "I don't know how to use a gun. It's simple enough." Kent demonstrated how to cock and fire the small pistol. 2 shots. "Keep it in your pocket or reticule. If Doyle finds you before I can help, I understand," she interrupted, taking the Derringer with reluctance. The metal felt cold and foreign in her palm, but she tucked it into her pocket nonetheless. As they prepared to leave separately, Kent caught her arm gently. "Josephine, I know trust comes hard after what you've been through, but I need you to believe I won't let Blackwell hurt you again." The intensity in his hazel eyes made her breath catch. For a moment, she saw beyond the practical alliance they had formed to the man beneath, principled, determined, and perhaps more affected by her situation than he let on. "Thank you, Kent," she said simply, unable to articulate the complex emotions his protection stirred within her. The rain had stopped by the time Josephine returned to the general store, though the streets remained muddy. Mr. Wilson raised an eyebrow at her extended absence, but made no comment as she resumed her duties with extra diligence. That night in her boarding-house room, Josephine removed the Derringer from her pocket and studied it in the lamplight. The weapon represented a fundamental shift in her circumstances, from fleeing to fighting back. She carefully tucked it beneath her pillow before extinguishing the lamp, wondering what sort of woman she would become by the time this confrontation with Blackwell concluded. Over the next week, Josephine and Kent settled into a routine of brief meetings and exchanged information. Kent secured his position at the mine and began mapping its operations, noting discrepancies in the ore shipments and unusual midnight deliveries. Josephine, meanwhile, discovered that Mr. Wilson's ledgers contained valuable details about the mining company's purchases, including equipment that seemed excessive for the mine's reported production. Their investigations took on greater urgency when Kent learned that Edward Blackwell himself was expected in Oregon City within 10 days. "He's bringing investors from San Francisco," Kent explained during one of their clandestine meetings behind the feed store. "Plans to give them a tour of his holdings here, including businesses along Main Street." "Has he purchased property near the general store?" Josephine asked, suddenly concerned that her workplace might fall under Blackwell's control. "Not yet, but there's talk he's negotiating for the building that houses the bank." Kent unfolded a rough map of Oregon City he had sketched, marking properties Blackwell had acquired or was targeting. "See the pattern. He's focusing on the north end of town, near where surveyors were seen taking measurements last month." "The railway," Josephine murmured. "You were right." Kent nodded grimly. "I've sent a letter to a U.S. Marshal I trust in Portland, outlining our suspicions about the railway speculation. But we need concrete evidence before he'll act against someone with Blackwell's connections." As they studied the map together, Josephine became aware of Kent's proximity, the clean scent of soap mingling with leather from his vest. Their heads nearly touched as they leaned over the paper, and when he turned to explain a particular notation, his breath warmed her cheek. She straightened abruptly, disconcerted by the flutter of awareness in her stomach. "Is something wrong?" Kent asked, noticing her sudden movement. "No," she said too quickly. "I just remembered Mr. Wilson is expecting a delivery this afternoon. I should return." Kent studied her face for a moment before nodding. "Be careful, Josephine. The closer we get to Blackwell's arrival, the more dangerous this becomes." His concern was evident in the furrow between his brows, in the way his hand moved instinctively toward hers before stopping short. Josephine found herself wondering what that callous palm would feel like against her own, then immediately chastised herself for the inappropriate thought. "I'm always careful," she assured him, gathering her shawl. "I'll see you tomorrow." As she hurried back to the general store, Josephine scolded herself for allowing such distractions. Her focus needed to remain on clearing her name and bringing Blackwell to justice, not on the broad shoulders or kind eyes of Kent Sutherland. Yet she couldn't deny that their partnership had evolved into something more complicated than simple allies against a common enemy. The afternoon at Wilson's general store passed uneventfully until near closing time, when the bell above the door jingled and three well-dressed men entered. Their fine suits and immaculate boots marked them immediately as outsiders in the practical frontier town. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," Mr. Wilson greeted them. "What can I help you find today?" The tallest of the three, a silver-haired man with a neatly trimmed beard, stepped forward. "Just browsing for now, thank you. We're interested in the commercial prospects of Oregon City." Josephine kept her head lowered as she restocked a shelf of canned goods, but her senses were on high alert. The men moved through the store, commenting on its organization and inventory, while asking pointed questions about business conditions in town. "And how long has this establishment been here?" the bearded man inquired. 22 years, Mr. Wilson replied proudly. "Started with nothing but a tent and a wagon load of supplies after the flood of '54 washed away the original settlement." "Impressive resilience," the man commented. "My associates and I represent certain San Francisco interests looking to invest in promising frontier communities. I'm Harrison Phillips, by the way." As introductions continued, Josephine risked a glance at the visitors. She didn't recognize any of them, but their connection to San Francisco immediately triggered suspicion. Were these Blackwell's investors? Her question was answered moments later when Phillips mentioned, "Our partner, Mr. Blackwell, speaks highly of Oregon City's potential." Mr. Wilson's eyebrows rose. "Edward Blackwell, the mining magnate, the very same. He'll be joining us next week to finalize certain arrangements." Phillips's gaze swept the store once more before landing on Josephine. "Your assistant seems quite efficient." Josephine froze as Mr. Wilson beckoned her forward. "Miss Miller joined us recently, but she's already proven invaluable." "Miss Miller," Phillips repeated, studying her with uncomfortable intensity. "Charmed, I'm sure." Josephine curtsied slightly, keeping her expression neutral despite the panic clawing at her throat. Had he recognized her? Or was his interest merely that of a man accustomed to appraising everything and everyone in terms of value? "A pleasure to meet you, sir," she murmured, her voice remarkably steady. The investors departed shortly thereafter, but their brief visit left Josephine shaken. If these men were Blackwell's advance party, his arrival was imminent. She needed to warn Kent immediately. As soon as Mr. Wilson locked the store for the evening, Josephine hurried toward the livery stable, hoping Kent might be there checking on his horse. Instead, she found only Tommy, brushing down a team of draft horses. "Evening, Miss Miller." "Belle's doing just fine, Tommy. Have you seen Mr. Sutherland today?" she interrupted. The boy shook his head. "Not since yesterday. He's working nights at the Silver Creek mine now. Won't be back in town till morning most likely." Josephine bit her lip in frustration. The mine was 3 miles outside town, too far to walk alone at dusk, and she couldn't risk drawing attention by asking to borrow a horse. "If you see him, would you tell him I need to speak with him urgently? It's about a letter from home." Tommy nodded, accepting the coded message they had established. "Yes, first thing when I see him." Reluctantly, Josephine returned to her boarding house, the weight of the derringer in her pocket offering little comfort, after a largely untouched dinner under Mrs. Patterson's watchful eye. She retired to her room and spent a restless night listening for every creak and footfall in the building. Morning arrived with no sign of Kent, and Josephine walked to the general store with trepidation, constantly scanning the street for Phillips or his associates. The store was unusually busy, giving her little opportunity to watch the door for Kent's arrival. It was nearly noon when the bell jingled and he finally appeared, his expression carefully neutral as he approached the counter where Josephine was measuring fabric for a customer. "Morning, Miss Miller," he said casually. "Tommy mentioned you were asking after me yesterday, something about a letter." Relief flooded through Josephine. "Yes, Mr. Sutherland. If you have a moment once I've finished with Mrs. Barker here, take your time." Kent moved to examine a display of pocket knives while Josephine completed the fabric sale. When the customer departed, Josephine quickly recounted the investor's visit, keeping her voice low despite the empty store. Kent's expression darkened as she described Phillips's scrutiny. "Did he seem to recognize you?" Kent asked. "I'm not certain. He was evaluating me, but whether as Josephine McAllister or simply as a woman, I couldn't tell." Kent's jaw tightened at the implication. "I need to find out more about these men." "If they're staying at the hotel," the bell interrupted him as Mr. Wilson returned from his lunch break. Josephine stepped back, resuming a professional distance from Kent. "Mr. Sutherland," Wilson greeted him. "What brings you in today?" "Just some tobacco and writing paper," Kent replied smoothly. "Miss Miller was helping me locate them." "Third shelf on the right," Wilson directed before turning to Josephine. "Those investors from yesterday returned this morning while you were receiving the flower delivery. Asked quite specifically about you." Josephine's blood ran cold. "About me? Whatever for? Wondered how long you'd been in town, where you came from." Wilson hung his hat on the rack behind the counter. "I told them you were a private person who did her job well, and that's all that concerned me." Kent had paused in the aisle, clearly listening though pretending to examine the tobacco pouches. Josephine forced a smile. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I appreciate your discretion." The storekeeper nodded. "Oregon City thrives on minding one's own business, Miss Miller. Remember that." The warning was clear. Questions about her past were circulating, and Wilson had his suspicions about her story. Whether he would continue to protect her remained to be seen. Kent made his purchases quickly, exchanging a meaningful glance with Josephine before departing. She understood without words that he would seek her out later, once he had investigated the investors further. The afternoon crawled by with excruciating slowness. Every time the bell rang, Josephine's heart leapt with equal measures of hope and dread. Hope for Kent's return, dread that Phillips or worse, Marcus Doyle, might appear. By closing time, her nerves were stretched to breaking. Mr. Wilson seemed to notice her tension as they prepared to close the store. "Miss Miller, is everything all right? You seem distracted today." "Just a headache, sir," she lied. "The changing weather, perhaps." He studied her for a long moment. "Those men who were asking about you, is there something I should know?" Josephine hesitated, weighing her options. Mr. Wilson had been fair and kind to her. He deserved some measure of truth. "I left my previous situation under difficult circumstances," she admitted carefully. "There are those who might spread untrue stories about me. I came to Oregon City hoping for a fresh start." Wilson nodded slowly. "I suspected as much. Many come west for similar reasons." He finished locking the cash box, then added, "Whatever your past, your work here has been exemplary. That counts for something with me." "Thank you, sir," Josephine said, touched by his understated support. Outside, the evening had brought a chill wind sweeping down from the mountains. Josephine pulled her shawl tighter, glancing up and down the street for any sign of Kent. When she didn't see him, she reluctantly began the walk to her boarding house. She had gone only a block when a figure stepped from between two buildings, blocking her path. Josephine's hand moved instinctively to her pocket where the Derringer rested. "Miss McAllister," a deep voice drawled. "Or should I say, Miss Miller?" The man stepped forward into the glow of a nearby storefront. It wasn't Phillips or any of the investors from the previous day. This man was younger, with a lean, predatory build and cold eyes that assessed her without emotion. A jagged scar ran from his right temple to the corner of his mouth. Marcus Doyle. Josephine's fingers closed around the Derringer. "Excuse me, sir, but you're mistaken. My name is Miller." Doyle's thin lips curved in a smile that never reached his eyes. "Is that so?" Funny thing about lies, Miss McAllister, they have a way of unraveling at the most inconvenient times. He took another step toward her. Josephine pulled the Derringer from her pocket and aimed it at his chest, her hand trembling slightly but her grip firm. "Stay back," she warned. Doyle merely chuckled, seemingly unconcerned by the weapon. Now, no need for dramatics. Mr. Blackwell simply wants a conversation with his old friend's daughter when he arrives next week, a civil conversation about misunderstandings. "There was no misunderstanding," Josephine replied, her voice stronger than she expected. "He tried to force himself on me, and when I refused, he destroyed my reputation and my family." "That's one version of events," Doyle shrugged. "In any case, I'm just delivering a message. Stay in Oregon City. Mr. Blackwell wants to resolve this situation personally." Before Josephine could respond, footsteps sounded behind her, quick and purposeful. Doyle's gaze shifted over her shoulder, his expression hardening. "Evening, Doyle," Kent's voice rang out, deceptively casual. "Didn't expect to see you in town so soon." Josephine didn't turn, keeping her eyes and the Derringer trained on Doyle as Kent moved to stand beside her. "Sutherland," Doyle acknowledged coldly. "Still playing cowboy? Or have you found a new role?" His eyes flicked meaningfully between Kent and Josephine. "Protector of fallen women, perhaps." Kent's hand moved to the revolver at his hip. "Miss Miller is under my protection. Whatever business Blackwell thinks he has with her can be conducted through me." The standoff stretched for several tense seconds before Doyle stepped back, hands raised in mock surrender. "Just delivering a message, but I'll be sure to tell Mr. Blackwell about your interest in the situation." With a final measuring look at Josephine, he melted back into the shadows between the buildings, leaving her shaking with adrenaline and fear. Kent gently placed his hand over hers, lowering the Derringer. "Let's get you somewhere safe." "My boarding house is the first place he'll look for you," Kent interrupted. "Mrs. Patterson would open the door to any man with a badge or a bribe." "Where then?" Josephine asked, still trembling as Kent tucked her arm through his, guiding her away from the direction Doyle had disappeared. "The Wilkinson Ranch. Mrs. Wilkinson has a soft spot for hard luck cases, and her husband owes me a favor." Kent kept his voice low, his eyes constantly scanning their surroundings as they walked briskly toward the livery stable. "We'll get your horse and ride out tonight." "My things, we'll send someone for them tomorrow. Right now, we need distance between you and Doyle." The urgency in Kent's voice brooked no argument. At the livery, they found Tommy closing up for the night, his youthful face brightening at their arrival. "Evening, Mr. Sutherland." "Miss Miller, I was just about to—" "We need Belle saddled immediately, Tommy," Ken interrupted. "And my gelding as well. It's urgent." The boy looked between them, taking in Josephine's pale face and the Derringer still clutched in her hand. Without further questions, he hurried to prepare their horses. "Kent," Josephine said quietly while they waited, "he knows who I am. He'll tell Blackwell." "I expected as much," Ken admitted, "but Blackwell won't arrive for several days." That gives us time to finalize our evidence and contact the marshal. What about Mr. Wilson? I can't simply disappear without explanation. Kent considered this. I'll send word in the morning that you were called away by an emergency. It's close enough to the truth. Tommy returned with their horses, curiosity evident in his expression but respectful enough not to ask questions. Kent pressed extra coins into the boy's hand. Not a word about this to anyone, Tommy. Miss Miller's safety depends on it. Yes, sir, Tommy replied solemnly, clearly thrilled to be part of something important. Kent helped Josephine mount Belle, then swung effortlessly into his own saddle. As they rode out of town, Josephine cast one last glance at the buildings of Oregon City, wondering if she would ever return, or if this was the beginning of yet another flight from danger. The Wilkinson Ranch lay 7 miles outside town, a modest spread with a main house, bunkhouse, and several outbuildings nestled against rolling hills. By the time they arrived, full darkness had fallen, with only the stars and a sliver of moon lighting their way. A lantern glowed in the main house window, and a figure appeared in the doorway as they approached a stout woman with gray streaked hair pulled into a practical knot. "Kent Sutherland, is that you riding in at this hour?" she called. "It is, Mrs. Wilkinson," Kent replied, dismounting and helping Josephine down from Belle. "I apologize for the late arrival, but we have an urgent situation." Mrs. Wilkinson stepped fully onto the porch, her shrewd eyes taking in Josephine's city clothes and tense posture. "I can see that. Bring your friend inside while my boy tends to the horses." The farmhouse interior was warm and inviting, with simple but comfortable furnishings and the lingering aroma of supper. Mr. Wilkinson, a weathered man in his 60s, looked up from his newspaper with raised eyebrows. "Trouble, Sutherland?" Kent nodded, keeping his hand at the small of Josephine's back in a gesture that felt both protective and reassuring. "This is Miss Josephine McAllister. She needs sanctuary for a few days." "McAllister," Mrs. Wilkinson repeated, recognition dawning in her eyes. "From Copper Creek, I read about," she stopped abruptly. "Never you mind, any friend of Kent's is welcome here." "Thank you, Mrs. Wilkinson," Josephine said, overwhelmed by the immediate acceptance. "I don't wish to impose nonsense. We have a spare room, and I've been wanting female company around this place." Mrs. Wilkinson bustled toward the kitchen. "You must be hungry after that ride. I'll fix you both some supper while Kent explains the situation to Harold." Left alone with Josephine while the Wilkinsons prepared food, Kent finally allowed his composure to crack. He ran a hand over his face, exhaustion evident in the lines around his eyes. "I'm sorry I wasn't there sooner," he said quietly. "I was tracking Doyle from the hotel and lost him in the crowd." "You arrived when it mattered," Josephine assured him, suddenly aware they were standing very close in the small sitting room. "I had the derringer." A ghost of a smile touched Kent's lips. "So I saw. Would you have used it?" "If necessary," she replied, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "I'm tired of running, Kent. Tired of letting Blackwell dictate the terms of my existence." Something shifted in Kent's expression, pride, perhaps, or admiration. He reached out tentatively, brushing a strand of hair from her cheek with calloused fingers. "You're the bravest woman I've ever known, Josephine McAllister." The simple touch and earnest words sent warmth cascading through her, settling in her chest like embers. Before she could respond, Mrs. Wilkinson called them to the kitchen, breaking the moment. Over a simple but hearty meal of leftover stew and biscuits, Kent explained their situation to the Wilkinsons, outlining Blackwell's crimes and their plan to gather enough evidence for the federal marshal. "That scoundrel's been buying up half the county," Mr. Wilkinson confirmed, his weathered face creased with concern. Offered to purchase my water rights last month, offered double what they're worth. Made me suspicious right off. The railway, Kent nodded. We believe he has inside information about the route. That'd be illegal, Mr. Wilkinson stated. Government contracts are supposed to be confidential until formally announced. Exactly. If we can prove he's acting on privileged information, you'll need more than suspicions, Mrs. Wilkinson interrupted practically. You'll need documents, witnesses willing to testify. Which is why we need time, Kent agreed. If Miss McAllister can stay here, of course she can, Mrs. Wilkinson declared, brooking no argument from her husband. The spare room is yours, dear, for as long as you need it. Josephine blinked back unexpected tears at the kindness. Thank you, both of you. Later, as Mrs. Wilkinson showed her to a small but comfortable bedroom, Josephine found herself at a loss for words. Why are you helping me? She finally asked. You don't know me. The newspapers painted me as a thief and worse. Mrs. Wilkinson's expression softened. I know enough about Edward Blackwell to doubt anything printed about his enemies, and I know Kent Sutherland wouldn't stake his reputation on someone unworthy. She patted Josephine's hand. Rest now. Tomorrow will bring challenges enough. Alone in the unfamiliar room, Josephine sat on the edge of the bed, the events of the day washing over her in waves. She had faced Marcus Doyle, fled town, and found refuge with strangers who believed in her innocence despite the stain on her name. And through it all, Kent Sutherland had stood beside her, his quiet strength a foundation she had begun to rely upon. The thought of Kent brought a flush to her cheeks as she recalled the gentle brush of his fingers against her skin, the intensity in his eyes when he called her brave. Such feelings were dangerous a distraction from their precarious circumstances. Yet she couldn't deny the quickening of her pulse whenever he was near, or the sense of safety his presence provided. This is foolishness, she whispered to herself, unpinning her hair with trembling fingers. Focus on clearing your name, not romantic fancies. But as she drifted toward sleep in the quiet farmhouse, her dreams were filled with hazel eyes and the promise of protection they held. The following days established a new routine. Kent divided his time between his work at the mine, where he continued gathering evidence of Blackwell's illegal operations, and the ranch, where he and Josephine pored over documents and planned their strategy. Mr. Wilkinson rode into Oregon City to collect Josephine's belongings from the boarding house, reporting that Mrs. Patterson had been surprisingly discreet about her sudden departure. More concerning was the news that Edward Blackwell had arrived in town ahead of schedule, accompanied by additional security men. His presence accelerated their timeline dramatically. The marshal will be in Portland for at least another week, Kent informed Josephine on the fourth evening as they sat at the Wilkinsons' kitchen table, papers spread before them. We need to compile our evidence and get it to him before Blackwell realizes what we're doing. What about this? Josephine held up a shipping manifest she had annotated. The mine ordered blasting powder sufficient for a year of operation, but their production reports show they're barely using any ore. Why stockpile explosives unless they're planning something else entirely? Kent finished, excitement kindling in his eyes. This connects to the land purchases along the proposed railway route. They could be planning to blast through Mount Jefferson Pass. Mrs. Wilkinson, who had been quietly mending by the fire, looked up sharply. That pass is federal land. They'd need permits, environmental assessments, all of which take time Blackwell doesn't want to spend, Kent said grimly. If he forces the railway route by creating a pass himself, the land he's purchased becomes exponentially more valuable overnight. And if people get hurt in the unauthorized blasting? Josephine trailed off, The implications clear. Blackwell would consider it acceptable collateral damage, Kent confirmed. We need to compile all this and get it to the marshal immediately. Mr. Wilkinson, who had been listening silently, stood from his armchair. I'll ride to Portland tomorrow. Been meaning to sell some stock anyway, won't raise suspicions. It's dangerous, Kent warned. If Blackwell's men suspect, I've faced worse than some city dandies with guns, the older man scoffed. Besides, who'd suspect an old rancher of carrying evidence against Edward Blackwell? The decision made, they worked late into the night organizing their findings into a comprehensive report. Kent's detailed maps, Josephine's meticulous annotations of financial records, and statements from miners about unusual activities formed a compelling case against Blackwell's operations. When the others had retired for the night, Josephine and Kent remained at the table, shoulders nearly touching as they reviewed their work one final time. This should be enough, Kent said, satisfaction evident in his voice. With the confession from Jim Reeves included, the marshal will have to act on both the railway fraud and the false accusations against you. If Blackwell doesn't intercept Mr. Wilkinson first, Josephine worried, absently tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. Kent's hand covered hers on the table, warm and steadying. Harold Wilkinson is smarter than he looks. He'll get through. The simple contact sent awareness spiraling through Josephine. Over the past days, such casual touches had become more frequent between them, a hand at her back, fingers brushing as they exchanged documents, shoulders pressed together as they studied maps. Each instance left her increasingly conscious of Kent as more than an ally. "Kent," she began hesitantly, "when this is over, if we succeed, what will you do?" He looked at her for a long moment, his expression unreadable in the lamplight. "I haven't thought that far ahead. For months, bringing Blackwell to justice has been my only focus." His thumb moved slightly against her knuckles. "What about you? Will you return to Copper Creek?" Josephine shook her head. "There's nothing left for me there. My father is gone, our home seized by the bank. I thought perhaps Oregon City." "It suits you," Kent said softly. "Though after all this, you could go anywhere, start fresh without shadows following you." "Anywhere," Josephine repeated, gathering her courage. "Would your plans take you in any particular direction?" The question hung between them, laden with meaning neither was quite ready to articulate. Kent's expression softened as he studied her face. "I find my direction increasingly influenced by considerations I hadn't anticipated," he admitted, his voice dropping to a near whisper. Josephine's heart quickened at the implication, but before she could respond, a noise from outside drew Kent's attention. He rose swiftly, moving to the window with his hand on his revolver. "What is it?" she asked, tension immediately replacing the warmth of the previous moment. "Riders," Kent replied grimly, "at least 3 approaching fast." Mr. Wilkinson appeared in the doorway, rifle in hand. "Trouble? Could be. Wake Mrs. Wilkinson, get her to the storm cellar." Kent turned to Josephine. "The evidence, gather it all." As Josephine hurriedly collected their papers, Kent and Mr. Wilkinson moved to defensive positions. Hoofbeats thundered into the yard, followed by a shout. "Sutherland, we know you're in there with the McAllister woman." Marcus Doyle's voice carried clearly through the night air. "How did they find us?" Josephine whispered, clutching the bundle of documents to her chest. "Doesn't matter now." Kent handed her his revolver. "Take this and go with Mrs. Wilkinson. I'll handle Doyle." "No," she protested. "I won't leave you to face them alone." Kent's expression hardened. "This isn't open for debate, Josephine. Those papers are our only chance of stopping Blackwell permanently. If anything happens to them or to you, it's all been for nothing." Mrs. Wilkinson appeared then, a shotgun in her capable hands. "This way, dear." The cellar has a hidden compartment, used it during Indian troubles years back. Reluctantly, Josephine allowed herself to be led toward the back of the house, looking over her shoulder at Kent with fear and something deeper tightening her chest. "Be careful," she pleaded. His nod was the last thing she saw before Mrs. Wilkinson hurried her through the kitchen and out a rear door to a small, concealed entrance set into the ground behind the smokehouse. The storm cellar was cool and dark, smelling of earth and preserved foods. Mrs. Wilkinson lit a small lantern once they were safely inside, revealing shelves of canned goods and supplies. "Harold and Kent can handle themselves," the older woman assured her, moving aside a barrel to expose a narrow opening in the stone foundation. "Put the papers in here. Even if they search the cellar, they won't find this spot." Josephine reluctantly relinquished the precious documents, then positioned herself near the cellar doors, Kent's revolver steady in her hand. Above them, muffled voices carried through the floorboards, tense but not yet hostile. "They're negotiating," Mrs. Wilkinson observed, cocking her shotgun. "Good, gives us time." Minutes stretched like hours as they waited in tense silence. Finally, footsteps approached the main house, multiple sets, entering rather than leaving. "They've come inside," Josephine whispered, alarm rising. More footsteps, heavier now, moving purposefully through the rooms above. Searching. Coming closer to the kitchen, to the rear door that led to their hiding place. "If they find us," Josephine said quietly, "I want you to say I forced you at gunpoint, that you had no choice but to hide me." Mrs. Wilkinson snorted. "I've never told a lie to save my skin, and I won't start now. Besides," she added with surprising steel, "no one threatens my guests." The cellar doors suddenly rattled, then burst open. Josephine raised the revolver, only to lower it immediately when Kent's familiar form descended the stairs. "It's clear," he announced, though his expression remained grim. "For now. What happened?" Josephine asked, accepting his hand to help her up the narrow steps. "Blackwell sent Doyle and 2 men to bring you back to town," Kent explained as they emerged into the night air. "Said he wants to negotiate a resolution to your misunderstanding." "And you believe that, Mrs. Wilkinson asked skeptically. "Of course not." Kent's jaw tightened. "But I convinced them you'd already left for Portland with Harold, carrying evidence of Blackwell's crimes to the federal marshal. They believed you." Josephine couldn't mask her surprise. A brief smile crossed Kent's face. "Doyle's not as clever as he thinks. Especially when Mr. Wilkinson made a show of being absent with his best horse missing from the stable." Mrs. Wilkinson chuckled. "Harold's just checking the north pasture. Clever thinking, Kent." "It won't fool them for long," Kent cautioned. "Once they reach Portland and realize Harold isn't there, they'll be back and more aggressive next time." The implications settled heavily over them. Josephine clutched Kent's arm. "What do we do now?" "We have until morning at most," Kent said decisively. "We need to get those documents to the marshal ourselves immediately." "But Portland is nearly 30 miles, Mrs. Wilkinson protested. "You can't possibly—" "Not Portland," Kent interrupted. "Sandy. The marshal's deputy is stationed there, just 15 miles east. If we ride hard, we can reach him before dawn." Josephine nodded, determination replacing fear. "I'll get the papers." While Mrs. Wilkinson hastily packed food and Kent prepared the horses, Josephine changed into riding clothes, practical trousers borrowed from Mrs. Wilkinson's younger days, and a sturdy shirt. By the time she emerged with the bundled documents, Kent had Bell and his gelding saddled and ready. "You'll be riding hard in the dark," Mrs. Wilkinson warned, handing them each a small pack of provisions. "The mountain trails are treacherous." "We don't have a choice," Kent replied grimly. "Once Doyle realizes he's been deceived, he'll come back with more men." The older woman nodded, then surprised Josephine by embracing her tightly. "You come back to us when this is over, you hear? Both of you." Josephine blinked back tears. "Thank you for everything, Mrs. Wilkinson." As they mounted their horses, Mr. Wilkinson rode into the yard, looking concerned. "Saw lights on the east ridge," he reported. "Could be nothing, or could be Doyle's men taking positions." Kent's expression darkened. "We need to move now. If we cut through Dawson's Creek, we can throw them off our trail." With final nods to the Wilkinsons, they urged their horses forward, keeping to a walk until they cleared the ranch buildings before breaking into a gallop across the moonlit fields. The night closed around them as they rode east, keeping to little-used trails Kent knew from his time working the territory. The mountain air grew colder as they gained elevation, and Josephine was grateful for the heavy coat Mrs. Wilkinson had insisted she take. They paused briefly at a small stream to rest the horses, neither speaking much as they listened intently for sounds of pursuit. The tension of their situation had created a different kind of intimacy between them, the shared danger binding them together more effectively than words. "We should reach Sandy by sunrise if we maintain this pace," Kent said as they remounted. "The Deputy Marshal Jackson Williams is a good man. He'll act on our evidence immediately." "And then?" Josephine couldn't help asking. Kent's gaze met hers in the darkness. "Then you'll be free, Josephine. Your name cleared, your future your own again." The prospect should have filled her with unalloyed joy, but instead she felt a curious mixture of hope and uncertainty. Freedom meant choices, including the choice of where to go and with whom. They had ridden perhaps another hour when Kent suddenly raised his hand, signaling a halt. He cocked his head, listening intently, then swore under his breath. "Riders behind us," he said quietly. "Moving fast." Josephine strained her ears and caught it too, the distant thunder of hoofbeats echoing through the forested hills. "Doyle, most likely. We need to split up." "No," Josephine protested immediately. "We stay together." Kent turned to her, his expression grave in the faint moonlight filtering through the trees. "Listen to me. You take the documents and continue east along this trail. It leads directly to Sandy. I'll create a diversion, lead them south." "It's too dangerous," she argued. "What if they realize I have the evidence? That's why I need to make sure they follow me instead." Kent reached into his saddlebag and withdrew a bundle of papers, blank sheets, and old correspondence. "I'll make sure they see these. They'll assume it's our evidence." Josephine's throat tightened with fear, not for herself, but for him. "Kent, if they catch you, I can handle Doyle and his men." He moved his horse closer to hers, reaching across to take her hand. "Josephine, this is our one chance to end Blackwell's tyranny. To give you back your life and ensure he can never do this to anyone else." The hoofbeats grew louder. Time was running out. "Promise me you'll be careful," she whispered, gripping his hand tightly. In answer, Kent leaned across the space between their horses and pressed his lips to hers, a brief, fierce kiss that contained all the words they hadn't yet spoken. When he pulled away, his eyes held hers with burning intensity. "I'll find you in Sandy when it's done," he promised. "Now go." Before she could protest further, Kent wheeled his horse around and galloped south, deliberately making noise to attract attention. Josephine watched him go, heart pounding against her ribs, before turning Belle eastward and urging her into a gallop along the darkened trail. The forest closed around her as she rode, branches occasionally whipping past her face. Behind her, she heard shouts and the sound of pursuit veering south, following Kent as he'd intended. Relief mingled with fear as she pushed Belle harder, knowing that every minute of lead she gained improved their chances. The trail narrowed as it wound through a rocky pass, forcing Josephine to slow Belle to a trot. Above, The stars began to fade as the first hint of dawn lightened the eastern sky. According to Kent, Sandy couldn't be more than a few miles ahead now. She had just emerged from the pass into a small clearing when Belle suddenly reared, nearly throwing Josephine from the saddle. A figure on horseback blocked the trail ahead, the silhouette unmistakable even in the pre-dawn light. Marcus Doyle. "Miss McAllister," he drawled, leveling a rifle at her chest. "Your cowboy friend isn't as clever as he thinks. Did you really believe I'd send all my men after him?" Josephine reined Belle in, her mind racing. The saddlebag containing the evidence pressed against her leg, a damning weight. "Mr. Doyle," she acknowledged, struggling to keep her voice even. "I'm simply traveling to visit acquaintances in Sandy. At this hour. Riding like the devil himself is on your heels." Doyle's scarred face twisted into a cruel smile. "No, I think you're carrying something Mr. Blackwell would find very interesting. Something about railway contracts and unauthorized mining operations." He knew too much. Someone had betrayed them, perhaps one of the miners Kent had interviewed, or someone at the general store who had seen their investigations. "I don't know what you're talking about," Josephine insisted, her hand inching toward the pocket where she had tucked the Derringer. Doyle dismounted, keeping the rifle trained on her. "Let's not play games, Miss McAllister. Hand over whatever documents you're carrying and Mr. Blackwell might be persuaded to be lenient. Continue this foolishness and, well..." He shrugged eloquently. Josephine's fingers closed around the Derringer. She had 2 shots, not enough if Doyle had reinforcements nearby, but perhaps enough to create an opening. "If you kill me," she said calmly, "you'll never find the documents. I've hidden them along the trail." Doubt flickered across Doyle's face exactly as she'd hoped. He took a step forward, lowering the rifle slightly. "You're bluffing." In one swift motion, Josephine drew the Derringer and fired. The shot went wide, but the sudden noise spooked Doyle's horse, which bolted into the trees. As Doyle instinctively turned toward the fleeing animal, Josephine kicked Belle into motion, charging directly at him. Doyle dove aside barely in time, losing his grip on the rifle as he rolled across the ground. Josephine galloped past, bent low over Belle's neck, urging the mare to her fastest pace. Behind her, Doyle's curses faded into the distance. The trail widened as it descended toward the valley where Sandy was nestled. As the sun crested the eastern mountains, Josephine caught sight of buildings ahead, the outskirts of town. Relief flooded through her, followed immediately by renewed worry for Kent. Had he escaped Doyle's men, or had her encounter with Doyle meant Kent faced greater numbers than anticipated? Sandy was just awakening as she rode down its main street, businesses beginning to open for the day. Josephine reined Belle to a stop outside the marshal's office, a small but official-looking building with the U.S. flag hanging limply in the still morning air. Dismounting on shaky legs, she tied Belle to the hitching post and approached the door, the precious saddlebag clutched to her chest. A bell jingled as she entered, drawing the attention of a broad-shouldered man bent over paperwork at a desk. "Can I help you, madam?" he asked, rising to his feet with a curious expression. "Deputy Marshal Williams." When he nodded, Josephine continued urgently, "My name is Josephine McAllister. I have evidence of serious crimes committed by Edward Blackwell of Copper Creek, including railway fraud and false accusations against myself and others." Williams's eyebrows rose, but to his credit, he didn't dismiss her outright. "That's a significant allegation, Miss McAllister. I'll need to see this evidence." "Of course." She placed the saddlebag on his desk, withdrawing the carefully organized documents. "There's also a man, Kent Sutherland, who helped gather this information. He's being pursued by Blackwell's men and may need assistance." The deputy's expression grew more serious as he scanned the first few pages. "This appears legitimate, but I'll need time to review it properly. Where exactly is Sutherland now?" "He created a diversion to allow me to reach you," Josephine explained, anxiety sharpening her voice. "South of here in the foothills. Please, you must send men to help him." Williams studied her for a long moment, apparently assessing her sincerity. "Wait here," he finally said, moving to a back room where she heard him issuing orders to someone. When he returned, his manner had become more formal. "I'm dispatching riders to search for Sutherland. In the meantime, I'll need your full statement regarding these accusations against Blackwell." He gestured to a chair. "This may take some time, Miss McAllister." For the next several hours, Josephine recounted every detail of Blackwell's crimes, from his unwanted advances and subsequent revenge in Copper Creek to his railway speculation scheme in Oregon City. Deputy Williams took meticulous notes, occasionally referring to the documents she had provided for verification. By midday, he seemed convinced. "This is certainly enough to warrant Blackwell's arrest pending investigation," he confirmed. "I've sent a telegraph to Marshal Reynolds in Portland. He'll likely arrive tomorrow to take charge of the case." "And what about Kent?" Josephine asked, unable to hide her concern any longer. "Have your men found him?" Williams's expression softened slightly. "Not yet, but Sutherland knows this territory well. If anyone can evade pursuers in these hills, it's him." The deputy arranged for Josephine to stay at the town's small hotel under the protection of a junior deputy. Though exhausted from the night's journey and the emotional strain of recounting her ordeal, Josephine found sleep impossible. She paced the small room, alternating between watching the street from the window and reviewing what might happen when the marshal arrived. Would Blackwell's connections shield him even from federal charges? Would her testimony be enough to clear her name? And most pressingly, where was Kent? As evening approached with no word, Josephine's anxiety transformed into a gnawing dread. Deputy Williams had promised to inform her immediately if his men returned with news, but the hours stretched on in silence. Darkness had fallen when a commotion in the street drew her to the window. Riders were approaching the marshal's office, at least 4 men, moving at a steady pace rather than the urgency she would expect if they had found Kent injured. Ignoring the deputy stationed outside her door, Josephine hurried downstairs and across the street, her heart in her throat as she recognized Deputy Williams among the returning search party. "Did you find him?" she called, hurrying toward them. Williams dismounted, his expression grave. "Miss McAllister, you should be resting. Did you find Kent?" she repeated, her voice breaking slightly. Before Williams could answer, one of the other riders dismounted, removing his hat to reveal a face she had feared she might never see again, bruised and dirt-streaked, but unmistakably Kent Sutherland's. "Josephine," he said, his voice rough with exhaustion. She closed the distance between them in 3 strides, throwing her arms around him with little regard for propriety or the curious onlookers. Kent's arms encircled her immediately, holding her tightly against his chest as she fought back tears of relief. "You're alive," she whispered against his shoulder. "I was so afraid when you didn't come." "Doyle's men were more persistent than expected," Kent explained, his breath warm against her hair. "Had to lead them on a long chase before circling back. I ran into the deputy's search party about 5 miles west of here." Deputy Williams cleared his throat. "Perhaps this reunion could continue inside. We have matters to discuss regarding Blackwell." Reluctantly, Josephine stepped back from Kent's embrace, though she kept her hand firmly in his as they followed Williams into the marshal's office. Inside, The deputy confirmed what Kent had already guessed: Blackwell had fled Oregon City upon learning of the evidence against him. Telegraph reports indicate he's heading for California, Williams explained. But Marshal Reynolds has already wired the authorities there. Blackwell won't escape justice this time. And the men with him, Doyle, Kent asked. 2 were apprehended outside Sandy. Doyle remains at large, but without Blackwell's protection, he won't get far. The news was better than Josephine had dared hope. And my name, the false accusations, Williams nodded solemnly. Marshal Reynolds will issue a formal statement clearing you of all charges once he arrives tomorrow. The evidence is overwhelming, Miss McAllister. Your reputation will be restored. The simple words struck Josephine with unexpected force. For so long, her identity had been defined by Blackwell's lies. She had been the woman fleeing scandal, hiding behind false names and fabricated histories. Now, she could simply be herself again. "Thank you," she said softly. Later, after Williams had finished debriefing Kent and arranged accommodations for him at the same hotel, they found themselves alone for the first time since their desperate parting on the mountain trail. They stood in the hotel's small parlor, the events of the past days settling around them like dust after a storm. "You did it," Kent said, admiration clear in his voice. "You got the evidence to Williams." "We did it," Josephine corrected. "I wouldn't have survived any of this without you, Kent." His expression grew serious as he stepped closer, taking her hands in his. "When I was being pursued, all I could think about was getting back to you, not just to ensure the evidence was delivered, but because—" He paused, searching for words. "Because the thought of not seeing you again was unbearable." Josephine's breath caught in her throat. "I felt the same way," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "When hours passed with no word, I realized it wasn't just gratitude I felt toward you, or even friendship." Kent raised one hand to cup her cheek, his touch gentle despite the calluses on his palm. "From the moment I recognized you in that cafe, something changed for me. I told myself I was helping you because of what happened to my sister, because it was the right thing to do. But the truth is more selfish than that." "Selfish?" she questioned, leaning slightly into his touch. "I wanted to be near you," he confessed. "To see that spark of courage in your eyes, to hear your voice when you speak of justice and possibility." Somewhere along the way, bringing down Blackwell became secondary to helping you reclaim your future, a future I found myself hoping might include me. The raw honesty in his words moved Josephine deeply. This was not the practiced flattery of society gentlemen, or the demanding possessiveness of men like Blackwell. This was something far more genuine, a recognition of equals, a request rather than an assumption. "Kent," she began, gathering her courage, "when I spoke of staying in Oregon City, it wasn't just because I had nowhere else to go. It was because I hoped you might stay as well." The smile that transformed his face was worth every moment of uncertainty she had endured. "I think Oregon City would suit me just fine," he murmured, drawing her closer. "Especially with the right companion." When his lips met hers this time, there was no desperate rush, no imminent danger forcing brevity. This kiss held promise of time, of patience, of a future neither had dared imagine until now. Josephine wound her arms around his neck, allowing herself to surrender completely to the moment, to the man who had risked everything to help her reclaim her name. Marshal Reynolds arrived the following day, an imposing figure whose reputation for incorruptibility had made him a legend throughout the Oregon Territory. He reviewed the evidence methodically, interviewed both Josephine and Kent separately, and ultimately confirmed Deputy Williams's assessment. "Edward Blackwell will face federal charges for railway fraud, witness tampering, and filing false accusations," he announced formally. Miss McAllister, I will personally ensure that your name is cleared in all jurisdictions where Blackwell spread his lies. The marshal's official statement was telegraphed to newspapers throughout the territory, including the Oregon City Sentinel, which had already begun reporting on Blackwell's arrest in California. By the time Josephine and Kent returned to Oregon City 3 days later, the town was buzzing with the scandal and with revised opinions about the quiet woman who had briefly worked at Wilson's General Store. Mr. Wilson himself greeted Josephine with surprising warmth when she visited the store to apologize for her abrupt departure. "No apologies needed, Miss McAllister," he insisted, using her real name with deliberate respect. "Anyone who stands up to a snake like Blackwell has my admiration. Your position here remains open should you want it." The offer touched her deeply. "Thank you, Mr. Wilson. I would be honored to continue working here." Mrs. Patterson proved similarly understanding, though she couldn't resist adding, "Next time you're fleeing dangerous criminals, a little advance notice would be appreciated." The Wilkinsons, who had worried tremendously when neither Josephine nor Kent returned immediately, welcomed them back with a celebration dinner that drew neighbors from miles around. The story of their confrontation with Blackwell spread rapidly, transforming in the telling until it approached the status of local legend. Amidst the commotion of Blackwell's arrest and the restoration of her reputation, Josephine and Kent found precious little time alone together. Their relationship, born in secrecy and danger, now blossomed under public scrutiny, each shared glance or casual touch noted and discussed by Oregon City's gossip network. "We're causing quite a stir," Kent observed wryly as they walked along the Willamette River one Sunday afternoon, 2 weeks after their return. "Mrs. Tompkins at the millinery shop asked me my intentions toward you yesterday." Josephine laughed, a sound that came more easily now that the weight of scandal had lifted from her shoulders. "And what did you tell her?" Kent stopped walking, turning to face her with an expression that made her heart skip. "I told her my intentions were entirely honorable, if somewhat accelerated by recent events." "Accelerated," Josephine repeated, an unexpected flutter of anticipation in her chest. "Josephine," Kent said quietly, taking her hands in his, "I know we've known each other only a short time, and much of that under extraordinary circumstances. Convention would dictate a longer courtship, but I find I have little patience for convention these days." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet pouch. "This belonged to my mother," he explained, opening it to reveal a simple gold ring set with a single pearl. "Nothing as grand as you deserve, perhaps, but offered with all my heart." Josephine stared at the ring, then at Kent's earnest face, momentarily speechless. He misinterpreted her silence, continuing hurriedly, "I understand if it's too soon. We could wait, court properly, yes," she interrupted, finding her voice at last. "Yes, Kent. I don't need more time to know what I want." The joy that illuminated his features matched the warmth spreading through her own chest as he slipped the ring onto her finger. It fit as though made for her, a little worn by time but solid and true, much like the man who offered it. "I love you, Josephine McAllister," Kent said, the words simple but profound in their sincerity. "Not despite what you've endured, but partly because of it. Your courage, your resilience, your unwavering belief in justice, they are as much a part of you as your smile or the way your eyes flash when you're determined." Tears blurred Josephine's vision as she raised her hand to his cheek. "And I love you, Kent Sutherland, for seeing me when others looked away, for believing in me when even I had begun to doubt, and for showing me that trust isn't always misplaced." Their kiss sealed the promise between them, witnessed only by the flowing river and the distant mountains that had provided both peril and protection during their ordeal. The wedding took place that autumn, as golden leaves drifted from the trees surrounding the small church in Oregon City. Mrs. Wilkinson insisted on hosting the reception at her ranch, transforming the rustic property with wildflowers and lanterns that glowed like fireflies as dusk descended. Mr. Wilson gave the bride away, a role he accepted with surprising emotion, confiding to Josephine that she had come to represent the daughter he and his wife had lost years earlier. Mrs. Patterson supervised the wedding cake with military precision, while Tommy from the livery stable proudly served as ring bearer, his usual dirt and hay dust scrubbed away for the occasion. Among the guests were faces Josephine had never expected to see again, her father's former business partners from Copper Creek, neighbors who had once shunned her based on Blackwell's lies, even the editor of the newspaper that had printed the original accusations. Their presence represented more than mere attendance. It was acknowledgment of the injustice she had suffered and the courage she had shown in facing it. Most meaningful of all was the telegram that arrived that morning from the U.S. Marshal's office. Blackwell sentenced to 15 years federal prison. Justice served. Congratulations on your wedding day. As Josephine danced in her husband's arms under the harvest moon, surrounded by a community that had become family, she marveled at how completely her life had transformed. The woman who had arrived in Oregon City with nothing but a tarnished name and desperate hope now stood vindicated, respected, and loved. Happy, Kent murmured against her ear as they swayed to the fiddle's melody. Beyond words, she replied, resting her head against his shoulder. I never imagined I could have this again, a place to belong, people who know the truth about me. You belong here, he assured her, his arms tightening around her waist. With me, with this town, with the life we're building. That life continued to evolve in the years that followed. Kent's reputation for integrity led to his appointment as deputy sheriff of Oregon City, while Josephine eventually purchased the general store when Mr. Wilson retired, expanding its operations to include a small lending library and meeting space for the community. Their first child, a son they named James Harold, after both Josephine's father and Mr. Wilkinson arrived on a snowy December night 2 years after their wedding. A daughter, Catherine Marie, followed 18 months later, inheriting her mother's honey-brown hair and her father's determined hazel eyes. Edward Blackwell's name faded from prominence, becoming little more than a cautionary tale about power misused and justice eventually served. Marcus Doyle was captured trying to cross into Mexico and sentenced to 10 years for his role in Blackwell's schemes. On the 5th anniversary of their first meeting in the Oregon City Cafe, Kent surprised Josephine with a deed to a small ranch outside town, not as expansive as the Wilkinson spread, but with good water rights and fertile soil for raising both crops and children. Our own piece of Oregon, he said, watching her face as she examined the documents. Something that belongs entirely to us, where no one can ever force us to leave. Josephine looked up from the deed, her eyes shining with emotion. You remembered what I said about always running, always leaving pieces of myself behind. I remember everything you've ever told me, Kent replied simply, drawing her into his embrace. Especially your promise that night by the river that you wouldn't need more time to know what you wanted. I've never regretted that decision, Josephine assured him, standing on tiptoe to press a kiss to his lips. Not for a single moment. As they stood together on the porch of their new home, watching their children explore the property with the boundless energy of youth, Josephine reflected on the unlikely path that had brought her to this moment of contentment. Her name, once ruined by lies, had been reclaimed through courage, transformed through love, and now stood as a testament to the power of truth to prevail against even the most determined malice. "I know who you really are," Kent had said that day in the cafe, the first person in months to see beyond the scandal to the woman beneath. In finding her true self again, not just the banker's daughter from Copper Creek, but the stronger, wiser woman forged through adversity, Josephine had discovered that sometimes the greatest freedom comes not from escaping the past, but from confronting it alongside those who believe in your worth. And in that knowledge, in that love, she had found her ultimate vindication.